Cullen, and I'm here to talk about nuclear power. Thanks very much for having me here to talk on this topic. I actually have to commend Éirígí a bit on this. Not very many political parties are engaging with the necessary long-term planning that's needed for the energy system, and this is certainly one component in that conversation. I'm going to be talking, I'm just going to introduce you to who my group is and what we do, and then I'm going to give a brief overview of Irish electricity currently and the future, and then I'll start talking about nuclear and then kind of steps from there. So these are 18 for 0. This is all of us. We're all volunteers. We've never gotten any money from it apart from a €30 donation someone once kindly gave us that we put towards our website. We all work, we're all engineers or physicists, but if anyone wants to join us, we'll take people from any kind of professional background. The one thing that unites us is that we are very worried about the future of Ireland's electricity. There are currently plans or goals to have net zero carbon emissions in the electricity sector by 2050, but there are no plans in place to do that. So I'm going to talk about Irish electricity and explain kind of why that's so concerning. So this graph here shows the current mix and the mix since about 2000 of Irish electricity. So on the right hand side you see where it is roughly now. It's about 60% fossil fuels and about 40% wind. Of the fossil fuels, we're about half of our total electricity is coming from gas, and the rest a little bit from kind of coal and peat. There was a target for peat is now pretty much phased out. There was a target for oil and coal to be phased out by 2025. This week, Leo Varadkar made it clear that's not going to happen because we don't have any systems in place to replace it. He said that it will be phased out, we'll continue to burn oil and coal for many years to come, and we'll phase it out when we have a reliable system in place. Which begs the question, if this goal has been in place for over 10 years, why is that system not in place now? Why do we not know what's going to replace it? Our current peak electricity use, just as a reference number for you to have, is 5.4 gigawatts. So at the maximum use of electricity Ireland uses at any time is about 5.5 gigawatts. In the next 2 years, Ireland's building 2 gigawatts of new gas plants. That is a lot compared to our main use of electricity. If Ireland is serious about phasing out fossil fuels, why are we building new gas plants this year and next year? And not just a small amount, that's a lot. This doesn't bode well for our net zero by 2050 plans. And to kind of further complicate all this, this is Éirígí's projection of Irish electricity consumption. Sorry, the picture's a little bit blurry, but our electricity consumption is going to about double by 2040. So not only do we have to make the electricity that we have much cleaner, but we also need lots and lots more of it. So something that also further complicates this is the current range of technologies that are permitted in Ireland that could provide more electricity and cleaner electricity are variable renewables, which are great. The government is aiming for 80% of our electricity to come from variable renewable sources such as wind and solar by 2030. That will certainly be really, really difficult to do. And as we can see in this graph from the OECD, when you get more renewables in your system, so their extreme scenario is 75% variable renewables, Ireland is aiming for 80% by 2030. You can see the system costs, so the costs not of building the turbine, not of anything like that, the costs of connecting it into the grid and supplying the power to people, just on that side, go up to, in their case, about $55 per megawatt hour. To let you know what that means, that is double the cost, that would double the cost of our electricity, just from those grid costs alone, not from the actual infrastructure costs that also go with it. So renewables are fantastic, but at the rate that we're looking to expand them, our electricity is going to get dramatically more expensive in the next few years. And this doesn't take into account that 80% doesn't get us to net zero. at that point we're still 20% gas. What is going to replace that 20% gas going beyond that? So, one technology option is nuclear energy. There are other options as well, but this is a very good one. And it's one that lots of other countries are looking into. And I'm going to just give you a brief overview of this technology. And I don't know if I mentioned at the start that I'm an energy systems engineer, so I'm very happy to answer technical questions on this at the end. This graph is from the United Nations Economic Commission from Europe, which came out within the last year. They did a systems comparison, so entire life cycle and carbon comparison for all major forms of electricity generation. The report didn't just cover carbon, they also covered other big environmental impacts such as land use and materials use. Nuclear power, apologies about my scribbling on it, I was trying to make it quite a technical graph a little bit clearer. Nuclear was the lowest. It's lower than every form of renewables, even including mining and every other part of the life cycle that people like to point out as being high carbon. When you look into the entire life cycle, nuclear power has lower carbon emissions than any other major form of electricity generation. So clearly, for that reason alone, we should be considering it in Ireland seriously if we want to generate power with low carbon emissions. It seems like an obvious thing to look into. On top of that, nuclear also performed the best for all their other environmental criteria. And I'd really recommend you to look up the report. I can send it on to people afterwards if you're interested. Just going back to that. The UNECE have also said in a separate report that international climate objectives will not be met if nuclear power is excluded from the mix. Under the International Energy Agency's roadmap to net zero, we saw at least a doubling of nuclear power globally in every scenario that got us to the net zero mix. And in the IPCC's landmark 1.5 degree report, in their median scenario, the amount of nuclear in the world had to increase sixfold to reach our carbon emission targets. So other countries are looking at nuclear power. It has, on to the next one. So a big reason why why Ireland hasn't looked into nuclear power in the past is that people said the size of the plants were too big, and it's great that other countries are going to build it, but it wouldn't be suitable for our grid. There are some technical reasons why maybe that wouldn't be true, but there is a bit of truth in that argument. But something that completely dispels that idea that nuclear wouldn't be suitable for our grid is small nuclear reactors, small modular reactors. They're also called SMRs. These are reactors that are about 60 to 300 megawatts. 300 megawatts is about the size of one of our gas plants in Ireland. So these are the same size as power plants we have in Ireland. We could directly replace current fossil fuel plants with these plants. And they're not just a futuristic thing. The one on the left there is an operating SMR plant that was connected into the grid in China in December. That is the turbine from it. I just thought it was a nice picture. The one, so there are operating SMRs in Russia and in China. There are SMRs that are going to come online in Europe and in the US and in Canada and some other countries in the mid-2020s. So there's one big project, and this is what the one on the right is based on. It's from a company called NewScale that will come online in the US in 2027. The reason why they've come online in Russia and China faster is because their licensing requirements are different. These technologies have been technically ready for a long time. When you see other countries talking about meeting climate targets, nuclear is a big consideration in them. Not just from the point of view of international organizations saying the world needs more nuclear, you see lots of individual nations going, we need more nuclear. Estonia is a country half the size of Ireland. They only have 2 million people, and they have never had nuclear before. Their economy is highly reliant on coal. They are planning on building their first nuclear reactor, so small modular nuclear reactor, the 300 megawatt one, which would be a good size for Ireland's grid, in the early 2030s. This is going from a current legislative ban on it, which is where Ireland is. Poland, 2 weeks ago, announced that they are also a very coal-heavy economy, and they've never had nuclear before. They're going to have their first nuclear plant online in 2029. The Netherlands, France, Slovenia, Hungary, Finland, Czech Republic, the UK, various other European countries, as well as North American countries, Argentina as well, are looking at building nuclear power plants to meet their carbon reduction targets, and they've been built into their country's plans. It's not good enough for Ireland to just say it's not an option and we can't look into it. Clearly, it is a good option that other countries are going for. So, at the moment, there are 2 statutory bans on nuclear power in Ireland, and this is an issue. What it's meant is there has been very little study done into what nuclear power could look like for Ireland over the last, say, 20 years longer. Why would you bother modelling a system that you know is illegal and won't get built? So academics haven't really touched it. And there's such a heavy political component to it that even academics who might look into it are discouraged from doing so because their funding comes from the government. So when we face this huge challenge of reaching net zero, a really important thing to do for any country is to stop, to assess, to take stock of what technology options are there out there, see are those going to be suitable for our country, and if they are, well, let's put them in a model and see which mix of those suitable technologies we'd actually want to build and in what quantities. No one had been doing that for nuclear power, so when 1840 formed, it was to address these questions, and the bulk of the work that we've done as a group has been to write a preliminary study, which you can access through our website at 1840.ie. And the purpose of this was to fill that information vacuum that was created by the legislative bans, and to highlight this as an option. This study isn't meant to be prescriptive and say, these are the results. It's meant to go, government, go do something. Political parties, go do something with this. We are highlighting this as an option. None of us have any vested interest in the nuclear sector. None of us are making any money from this. In fact, it's cost us quite a bit of money. So I've been working on this full time for a few months unpaid. So this is really just to propel other people to take it and go further. So I really hope some of you might be able to do something with it. The structure of our report followed a technology review of what nuclear plants might be technically suitable for Ireland. This wasn't exhaustive, it's just indicative. We took one of those and we put it into a model to see why would we bother looking into nuclear, would there be any benefits to Ireland? And then from that we looked into, if we want to develop nuclear, how would we go about doing it? And there's a very well-established international approach to doing it. These are the results of our model. We ran 2 scenarios, one under using the government's kind of wish. I wouldn't call it a plan to reach net zero by 2050. So the government's scenario is that we just keep increasing the amount of renewables in our system up until 2050. It's not entirely clear that it'll be technically possible, but assuming it is, that's what we modelled against. And then this was the other model, the other technology mix, where we replace, as older gas plants are coming offline, we start replacing them with nuclear plants because they directly can fit in for each other. And what we ended up with was, and then we took information for storage and interconnection, all this from air grid numbers. We only took industry numbers, we didn't come up with anything ourselves. The mix that we came up with was about 70% renewables and about 18% nuclear, which is where our name 18 for net zero, comes from. And then the rest is kind of a mix of interconnection and storage. The blue line that's running through this is carbon emissions. And you can see that by the time the nuclear plants get implemented and we get to 18%, carbon emissions are down to a minimum. It's not possible to reach zero just from this scenario without carbon capture and storage, because there's always inherent carbon to whatever system you have, even renewables, even nuclear. So it's not necessarily zero, it's minimum. And that's where the idea of net zero comes from, that you can compensate in other ways. We found that our scenario got to net zero faster than a scenario using just renewables. We also found in this scenario, we use 99% less land than a system that just used renewables, because when you need renewables getting up to the very high percents, you need to massively oversize your systems. This is really bad for biodiversity. The technology mix that use nuclear also use 90% less concrete and cement than the system with just renewables, because the system isn't as oversized, and also 90% less steel. Based on that technology mix, we ran a few different kind of parameters, but one of the ones that's kind of more interesting, I think, politically, is the cost of generating electricity. So this is when you take into account the cost of building your power plants, getting your infrastructure set up around it, your fuel costs, everything like that. You add all those up and you divide it by the amount of electricity you actually provide. You get a thing called the levelized cost of electricity. This isn't the price of electricity. The price of electricity is based on our market system and this kind of complicated bidding system. But this is indicative of how much it costs to generate the electricity in the first place. It doesn't take into account any of those massive systems costs I mentioned at the start. That's separate. This is just from the plant itself and the fuel. We found that so 2020 and 2030 were the same for both scenarios, and they only diverged in 2040. We found that the current system, the renewable system that people peg on about, is more expensive than our system, which is the one in blue. These are only rough and indicative numbers, but it at least is very compelling that it's something we should look into, and it's certainly not going to be dramatically more expensive than the other options. So we also covered in our report a number of infrastructure issues to do with nuclear power. We covered 12, including like legal framework, human resource, grid, site and the site selection. I really recommend that you check out the entire report, but one issue that Brian mentioned to me might be of interest, and is something that I do get asked about a lot, specifically, is the waste. So one of the infrastructure issues we looked into, how would this be implemented in Ireland, was how would we deal with the nuclear waste? Would we be able to do that? This photograph is all of Switzerland's high-level nuclear waste. They have been operating nuclear power plants for over 50 years, and it's 35% of their electricity. This is all of the waste that is ever produced. That dot in the middle is a person for scale. Nuclear waste is not a particularly difficult hazardous waste to manage. There are all sorts of hazardous industrial wastes that we manage very successfully. Nuclear waste, in particular, is an extremely good safety record worldwide. There has never been a major or any significant release of stored nuclear waste. And that is something that cannot really be said for pretty much any other industry that manages hazardous waste. Ireland already manages nuclear waste. There's different types of nuclear waste. There's low level, intermediate, and high level. And what those low, intermediate, and high refer to is the amount of heat that gets generated within the waste itself. What we think of as nuclear waste, and what I refer to as nuclear waste in this photo, is high-level waste, which is predominantly the used fuel that comes out of the reactor. That's high-level because it's generating a certain amount of heat. What you do with it is you store it in places like this for a number of decades until the heat goes down to the same level as intermediate, or it lowers down, and then you can go and you can do whatever you want with it. I mean, there's certain type of reactors that burn it up. There's like you can use it as fuel in other types of reactors. You can recycle it. I think 97% of it can be recycled, which is what France does. We actually had someone from the recycling unit in France's waste management system talk in one of our webinars. If you're interested, you should check that out. It's a quite a manageable waste stream when you look at the decades of experience that are there in the world. And Ireland, in the type of nuclear waste that we currently manage, I mentioned earlier, is low-level waste because it doesn't produce the same amount of heat. But Ireland has been commended by the International Atomic Energy Agency for how well we do manage with the waste streams that we have. And Ireland, that's regulated under the EPA at the moment, and Ireland's actually quite a good standard internationally for that. So there's every reason to believe we'd be competently able to handle the nuclear waste, like so many other countries have done for decades. Another kind of infrastructure issue, this kind of, I've got 2 slides on people. So I thought that this might just be more interesting because I know this was the area I particularly found most interesting when I talk about developing a whole new industry in a country. And so the first half of people is workforce. A common concern about developing a new industry is who would work in it. We don't have nuclear engineers in Ireland. And that's not true. We do have some nuclear engineers in Ireland. I know them, we've seen some pictures of them, but that's not really, I'm bringing the facilities just because that's not really who would staff the plant. Nuclear power program, so these are indicative numbers. The number of people, that's much higher than if it was for Ireland, but the time scales are about right. If we were to develop nuclear power in Ireland, it would take between 10 and 15 years, and this is done on a time scale of, I think, 14 years, from when you first say, I'm going to do a study into it, to when you generate electricity from the plant. It takes between 10 and 15 years. The vast majority of workers come online, or like start getting trained in, start getting hired between years 8 to 14, and those will mostly be plant workers. So we have time to train people in to get into those roles. The other kind of ones at the start are people who would work in the regulatory body, who already work in the EPA, and people who would work in the government study looking into it, who obviously already exist in Ireland. The plant workers, you might be interested to find out that there's actually very few nuclear engineers in them. One of my colleagues, we don't get paid, in 1830, worked in a nuclear power plant in the UK with 300 staff, like operational staff, one of whom was a nuclear engineer. Nuclear engineers design nuclear reactors, they don't work in them. Technicians operate nuclear power plants. A study done of US nuclear power plants showed that 3/4 of roles for operating a nuclear power plant or running a nuclear power plant don't require degree level knowledge. They're technician roles. They're highly skilled, good, well paid jobs and highly desirable jobs that don't require years of training in advance. So off the bat, we actually have most of them in Ireland. They operate our coal plants, they operate our peat plants, they're already there. The other kind of 1/4 of the workers that would need a degree level are instrumentation and control kind of workers, electrical engineers, people who work in radiation protection. The vast majority of these also already exist in Ireland. And I doubt we'd have any issue retraining people who work in current power plants into a new nuclear power plant, considering EDF in the UK does that from coal to nuclear on a timescale of about 1.5 years. Workforce would not be an issue, and it would actually be a significant opportunity when you think about all the plants that are currently getting shut down in Ireland, with towns built around them based on a few decades of employment that's then going to evaporate. It's a particularly good opportunity for a just transition, in my opinion. And then the other, sorry, I've probably gone way over time. The other element of people is, of course, more societal. This wasn't one of the infrastructure issues that we looked into, but it's been brought up a lot recently in kind of the news, and it's been brought up as a kind of fear that, okay, nuclear sounds like it could address some questions, but why would we even bother looking into it? Because we couldn't do that. We wouldn't want to, you know, we can't even build a road, and people just object to everything. So clearly we couldn't do it here. We tried to do it in the 70s, and everyone got so up in arms about it, it went away. So clearly we're just not meant to have nuclear. And I think that this is a really weak point that when you even scratch at it, completely crumbles apart. For a start, all the issues I mentioned at the start of this presentation with needing to decarbonise rapidly and bring on loads more infrastructure in the next decades, that is really difficult anyway. We are going to struggle with doing that anyway. There are going to be big changes anyway that people are going to have to get on board with. So the idea that Irish people just don't want change and we can avoid change by not building nuclear is nonsense. Change is coming anyway. It's up to us at this point to make sure that the change that we're investing billions of our resource in, we're investing our air quality in, and we're investing the affordability of electricity and the reliability of electricity for future generations. we're investing in all that now. We need to make sure that we're investing in a system that does that the best and provides the best outcomes for us and for future generations. It's not really good enough to think that we're so incompetent we couldn't do it. We're going to have to do things anyway, and at this early stage, at this point where we critically need to be looking into things, we can't just be shelving options for no good reason other than a gut feeling that we're inadequate compared to other countries. I don't think that, even all of that aside, I don't think that it would face the opposition that people seem to think it would face. The Journal ran a poll on nuclear power, I think like last October, and they asked people, should we build a nuclear power plant? And 43%, like, should we build it, not even consider it. 43% of Irish people said yes, we should build it. 43% said no, and the rest were undecided. And tellingly, about 65% of young people said we should build it, not even look into it. I don't think that there's the opposition there that most people think about. When you think about who opposed nuclear before, it was environmentalists with concerns about what would we do with the waste. And in the 1970s, that was a very valid concern, because there weren't the well-established decades-old waste streams that we have now and that we've seen work in other countries. People were also worried about nuclear bombs because there was a conflation with nuclear power plants with nuclear technologies, but that is just a conflation. Those things don't go together at all. Nuclear power plants aren't used to make bombs. Environmentalists today have very different concerns, mainly climate change. And by not looking into nuclear and by continuing to use fossil fuels to support our renewables, we're really working against the interests of environmentalists. And I don't think that Irish people are too, not in my backyard, or too silly to realise this. What I have realised the biggest opposition to nuclear power in Ireland is, in 2 years of me campaigning for us to look into it with 18 for Zero, is that people say other people wouldn't want it, so we can't do it. I don't come across people saying I don't want it, so we can't do it. It's this fear that other people are so against progress, we couldn't we couldn't go forward, which is so frustrating because it's completely circular logic. What that means is people are saying we couldn't do it because people wouldn't like it, and therefore those people don't like it, so we can't do it. And ultimately, we are not choosing what's in our best interest. So, where would we follow on if we were to look into nuclear power? We think, not even just I think, when you see what other countries have done, it's clear we need a study of all of our technology options to see what could get us to net zero emissions. Éirígí is currently making up pathways, so a model based on technologies that they're choosing, and they're going to come out with different technology mixes, so different pathways to get to net zero emissions by 2050, and in 2024 the government's going to choose one of those. This model can't exist in a vacuum. We need the studies to back it up and show how would this be suitable for Ireland, how would this work in Ireland. Our report shows it would be suitable for Ireland, but people shouldn't take us at our word. The government should be commissioning this. And then, of course, nuclear should be included in those models by Éirígí on equal footing with other technologies. We need to remove the legislation that currently prohibits nuclear development in Ireland, because this has had a chill effect on research and on academics. And we need to fill the nuclear energy policy void that's existed in Ireland as a result of those two pieces of legislation. So, I guess, yeah, the last thing is it's really important for people to take an interest in this and to get it out there, because it's very clear that the current government are not going to drive this, and this drive is going to have to come from interested individuals and people talking to their communities and to people they know, and to ask for this kind of change. So apologies, I've probably gone really over time, but I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has.